Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome to the Chessable Masters tournament in 2020. We are now in the second match game between Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri. Magnus won the first match game yesterday, and if Magnus wins this one, then it's again game over for Anish Giri, because then Magnus Carlsen would have this unreachable 2 match points, and it will be game over, as I said. But I think that Magnus Carlsen was very motivated in this game, because in this previous tournaments, Anish Giri, after he won one match game against Magnus, he was going like psh, and I think that Magnus Carlsen had every reason to shut down now Anish Giri, but I still think that everything was all for fun. Magnus was of course also joking about that. So as I said, I really like Anish Giri's provocations a little bit on Magnus Carlsen, so that's why it was also fun, but also I think a tensed final between these two top grandmasters. So let's check out now the game. In the first game, Magnus Carlsen was playing with the white pieces, so we'll call it the decisive game, because in this other match games, all of these games ended in a draw. So who won this game will was also winning this match game, this second match game. So let's check out what happened. So we have here d4 by Magnus, knight to f6 by Anish, c4, e6, knight to f3, and now after d5 the queen's gambit decline. Knight to c3, the 3 knights variation, and now after c5 we have the so-called Tarrasch defense, and the Tarrasch is really a great opening. If you're familiar more with my YouTube chess channel, I've created some openings for black against d4. So in the future, I think I will analyze also the Tarrasch defense from A to Z, sort of. We'll analyze many lines in this opening from black's perspective. Here, Magnus plays this exchange variation in the center, which is the best way. Whenever you face dynamics in the center, then you should always evaluate the possible trades of pawns. What is the result of these trades of pawns? If I'm going to continue the game with an isolated pawn, do I continue with maybe with a powerful center? If I'm continuing the game with a backward pawn, so you should always consider some possible trades of pieces and never allow to maybe continue the game with a weak isolated pawn or maybe with a weak backward pawn. So that's why this move c takes d5 comes with the idea after a potential here e takes d5. Then Magnus Carlsen could always play something like d takes c5, and then black would continue the game with an isolated pawn. But here Anish plays the move knight to d5, which is the main line of the Tarrasch defense. We have e4, pardon me, after knight to c3, b takes c3, and now after c takes d4, c takes d4, and the main line is of course bishop to b4. When I faced the Tarrasch defense many times, I really have had troubles to play against this opening. I was always thinking, why is black trading off so many pieces? Why is black trying to simplify the position so much? Why is he going into this trades of pieces? Why isn't he complicating things? The problem of the Tarrasch defense for white is after this move bishop to d2, which is the most natural way to proceed here. Bishop to d2, queen to d2. It seems now that white has basically a comfortable game, because white has the pawn central control. It means these two very nice centralized knights. You see they're controlling this 4 squares on the other side of the board. But there is a tricky part of the Tarrasch defense, and it's this pawn structure. This pawn structure, when we play in a middle game like this, it's perfectly fine for white. But I just want you to imagine now this position without the minor pieces on the board, maybe even with the rooks and the queens of the board. Just focus on the pawn structure. The pawn structure is good when we play middle game. But if this game goes into an endgame with this kind of a pawn structure, that's the cool idea about the Tarrasch defense. Then I think black has a comfortable game, because black can create a distant pass pawn, because black has here a 2 versus 1 situation on the queen side. I've mentioned that many times. It's really a great idea by Tarrasch that he has invented. Now what black basically wants to do is to go into an endgame. That's why black is trading so many pieces off the board. And now, as I said, if this game goes into an endgame, then black has really a great position. So that's why white has to make something with this powerful center. White needs to make something with this 2 centralized pawns. So probably white should search for some pawn breakthroughs, maybe with the move d5. So after the move castling, we have bishop to c4, developing the bishop of the most active square. We have knight to d7. Also knight to c6 is an idea. I've seen that also many times after castling, b6, and now after d5, Here black could go with knight to f5. That's why it was very important to place the knight on a5. And you see now rook to c1 is a possibility after maybe knight takes c4, rook takes c4. Now we have really a more simplified game in which, okay, white has this isolated pawn, but it can be supported. That's the tricky part with rook to d4. Then this pass pawn could be very annoying for black, because isolated pawns, you should always evaluate by the strength. Can I push this pawn or can I not? So in this potential position, rook to d4 followed with d6 is perfectly fine. The knight could come into the game. So still, it's playable for both sides. Again, I'm pointing out, black could also counterplay with the queen side using this 2 versus 1 situation. But in the game, Anish played not knight to c6. He played the move knight to d7 because there was this threat to play the move d5 immediately. I think probably Anish doesn't like this particular line, so that's why he played the move knight to d7. In the game castling, we have b6, rook to d1. You see how Magnus Carlsen is supporting these 2 centralized pawns. Now the next move will probably be rook to e1, and we would have a very powerful support by the rooks on these 2 centralized pawns. And then maybe it's time to push the pawn on d5. So here bishop to b7, rook to e1, and now rook to c8, attacking the bishop. Very important move now, and bishop to b3. What to do here from black's perspective? Of course, Anish has to make something happen. What black could do maybe here is a potential knight to f6 move. It's a provocative move, because if white tries the move e5, then we could create a blockade. Here, that's the problem. You see, we could create really a blocking system here against this backward pawn. So you see, it's very hard sometimes for white even to make a plan here, because you can face some isolated pawn situations. You can also face some backward pawn situations. So it's really tricky pawn structure for both sides. In the game, rook to e8 was played, and now rook to e3 played by Magnus. We have knight to f6. And okay, you could defend maybe with bishop to c2, and I don't know, maybe even try to push the pawn on e5, but you saw the problems after the potential knight to d5. Here Magnus goes for a very aggressive line with the move d5. After e takes d5, you could maybe even take this pawn on d5, but here Magnus goes into a very tricky line with the move e5, attacking immediately the knight. Very aggressive here in the game. Knight to e4 played by Anish, and now comes queen to e1. Here comes, I think, already the critical moment of the game. So here Anish played the bad move. I think it was the move queen to c7. It's of course a developing, it's connecting rooks, but a better move here for black is to play the move c5, knight to c5. Why is this move so important? Because, as I said, in this supported isolated pawns, you should always try to advance the pawn. So this knight to c5 is protecting the potential e6 move. So white would be forced to play something like knight to d4 in order to support this potential e6 move. But I think with queen to g5, black can solve all of the positional problems. Okay, white could maybe proceed with e6, but now f takes e6, knight takes e6, and now knight takes e6 is perfectly fine. You see, this pawn is protected twice by the queen and the bishop. Everything is glued together, everything is compact, so I think that black could have a favorable continuation here, because this move by Magnus Carlsen, this e5 move, sacrificing the pawn, was really risky. It brings black really into an advantage, and here in the game, as I said, queen to c7 played by Anish, and it allows now Magnus Carlsen to develop his knight here to d4. This is possible because you cannot take with the rook or the queen, because you will get this move f3 and you lose some pieces here on the board. So that's why you see this queen to c7 allowed here Magnus Carlsen to play this very active move with the move knight to d4. We have a6, another, I think, bad move here by Anish, really an unnecessary move. Probably he was threatened by this move knight to b5, knight to d6, but still this knight is controlling this d6 square, so that's why I think this a6 move was unnecessary. It gives again Magnus Carlsen the opportunity to create now finally an attack. Again, pointing out e5, rook to e5, queen to e5 doesn't work. In the game, rook to d8 was played, and now f3, kick away the knight, and you see now this move knight to c5 comes a little bit too late because Magnus simply pushes further. We have knight to e6. If you try here knight takes b3, I don't think it's a problem because we have a takes b3. It's not a problem. We could place our knight here on f5, play something like queen to g3, and attack the weak square on g7, even threaten some checkmate. So tricky stuff that Magnus Carlsen has prepared here. H5, we have knight to e6, which again wasn't the best of moves. Now this knight to e6 blocking system is not important. A better idea is to play bishop to c8. This move is very important as it restricts this knight's ability to jump on f5. Here I think it could be an equal game for both sides. Maybe h6 is a possibility here for Magnus, but g6 we simply pass through. If the queen gets into the game, maybe we could go with queen to e7, competing with the queen, never allow this queen to come here maybe on dark squares and deliver some checkmate. So here going into favorable trades of pieces is perfectly fine for black. But as I said, knight to e6. Now this bishop to c8 idea doesn't work anymore. We are not controlling the f5 square, and you see this moment Magnus Carlsen uses immediately to get this knight on a very active square. Now queen to g3 is a serious threat. In the game d4 played by Anish, and we have rook to d3, knight to c5, rook takes d4, and now rook takes d4, rook takes d4, and now knight to b3. It seems now that okay, a takes b3 is also good here for white, but Magnus finds, of course, the best moves now. His pieces are really in attacking formation. He plays first queen to g3, attacking here the pawn on g7, creating this immediate checkmate threat. You cannot take the rook, so that's why here g6 had to be played, and now Magnus Carlsen plays a takes b3 finally. And what to do here? You see Anish has some troubles. There are some dark square problems. The next move we can also try e6, splitting some pawns. This rook is very active, so again we could try queen to g5, queen to h6, sneaking in with the queen. The only move, but really the only move that could cause some troubles here for white is the move bishop to f3. It's really hard to see this move in this fast time format. It's really impossible to see it because the problem is now if you take g takes f3, then it's a problem here. I think that black has suddenly a comfortable game here after queen to c1, king to b2, g2, and now queen to b2 is a check, and now you would be forced to maybe cover with the queen, and in the next move we could maybe take out the knight. White doesn't need to go into this line. White could go after the move bishop to f3. White could go with the move knight to d6, but again queen to c1, you see king to h2, and now bishop takes g2. It's very tricky that Anish missed here. Maybe king takes g2, and after queen to b2, attacking the rook with the check. Queen to f2 is a possibility, but now king takes f2, and now rook takes e5. Here it's maybe, I'm not sure, maybe this is playable for black because you see black has now 5 pawns on the board, white has only 2. Okay, this is of course an extra piece for Magnus Carlsen, but I would love to see this endgame, how Magnus would have played this endgame with this extra knight, but with this with not so many pawns on the board, so it would be really a dynamic endgame, I think. But in the game, Anish, after the move a takes b3, plays the move rook to d8, competes with rook, but now Magnus sees a very nice move. You can pause the video and really try to find the cracking move that breaks really Anish Giri's position. I'll leave a couple of seconds because it's really a great tactic. Here Magnus plays the very aggressive e6. Great move because if you take the queen here, then of course we have rook takes d8. It's a deflection motif. You're getting checkmated. The knight is controlling the e8 square. So that's why queen to c1 was played by Anish, king to h2, and again rook takes d4. But again, Magnus Carlsen doesn't take the rook. It's not about the rook. It's about this pass pawn here, e7. The problem is now that you cannot go behind this pawn. You cannot play rook to d8. So that's why the only move that saves the position is the move queen to c8. But now Magnus plays queen to e5, and in this position it's basically game over. There's nothing you can do. Here you get checkmated on g7. In the game, Anish tried rook to h4, and after king to g3, and Anish Giri resigned. So great attack by Magnus with this move e6. This is really a winning move. If you take here. You're again splitting some pawns. You see the queen is hanging. So there's nothing to do here in this position. Black is simply lost. Magnus saw this tactic, and it was really a beautiful chess game played by Magnus. But it's all Anish made these inaccuracies, and as I said in the beginning of the video, after this game, 3 more draws were played, so it was Magnus Carlsen who is winning now this tournament. Congratulations to Magnus. It was a little bit expected, but I was hoping also maybe that Anish Giri maybe wins this tournament. It would be very cool to see what would be going on the social media if Anish Giri would have won a match game against Magnus Carlsen in the finals. It will be a bomb, I think, on Twitter or something. So, but okay, this is still, I think, a fair and deserved result. Magnus played simply the best chess. That's why he's really the best chess player these days. And again, congratulations to Magnus. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot because I wanted to see how Magnus will face this Tarrasch Defense. If you want to see more games from this tournament and some other games from other tournaments, you can also check out my commented chess games. And if you want to see the best chess games of all time, check out my best chess games of all time series. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.